You just heard from a political theorist, professor of religious liberty law. I'm a historian, and part of why that was such a great lecture, so I worked with the modern period, the Enlightenment, 19th and 20th century, and this whole question of whether the Western world is headed toward a more secular framework and what it means now that doesn't seem to have happened. I mean, the whole question of the relationship of religion and the modern period is very much in flux right now, more generally than even in the legal world. But what I appreciated so much about your talk was your challenging that idea that religion is the cause of all the conflict in the world. So I also am grateful to be here today. I think what you're doing in Iowa Religious Freedom Day should be done in every state in the union. I wish it could, because this issue is so important for our culture today. The reason I'm here is I wrote a book just about a year ago called Claiming the Courageous Middle, Daring to Live and Work Together for a More Hopeful Future. And I wrote this, again, not really out of my disciplinary specialty in particular terms, but from working with college students for 40 years. And I do believe that thoughtful people of true conviction, I'll call it that, so that it covers all the bases. Thoughtful people of true conviction really are in the best position today to be the peacemakers of our society. And so I'd like to talk today about what I've called daring to choose peace, the courage and the cost. So when I was a young historian, I was fascinated by how much energy the discipline put into determining the causes of war. Endless debates about the causes of the Civil War in this country, the causes of the 17th century war in England, and then the biggest of all, the causes of the Great War, which we know now as World War I. And if you can believe it, historians are still writing books about the causes of war. And it struck me as very odd, as a young, maybe idealistic historian. I thought, well, good grief, war is the thing that we always have with us. Why is that the big surprise that we're putting all of our energy into trying to figure out why war? And I began to wonder what would happen if historians took the same amount of time and energy to study what is it that creates the conditions of periods of peace in the world. And there are some. Hard to believe right now when we look at the world, but there actually are some periods that are more stable than others. And I really wondered about that. Now, it hasn't happened, but part of what we want to talk about tonight is what might happen if that ever could be the case. The bottom line may be actually that when we say that we want peace, we actually find war and conflict more interesting. It's war that inspires courage and daring. It's war that produces heroes. It's conflict that drives most of the plots of novels and movies. And I started thinking about what kinds of special effects would be required of a movie about peacemaking. I mean, I can't imagine what kind of special effects would be as dramatic that they would, be out there on the previews and draw people back to the theater in movies about peacemaking. Just a couple of weeks ago, I came across Stanley Horowitz's very short but very provocative book, Jesus Changes Everything. Some of you may know Stanley Horowitz is an ethicist, retired now from Duke. But one of his quotes is he said, "We say we want peace, but we confess that war and violence capture our imagination and our spirits." I think there's something to that, so I want to just leave that out there. Even if we could be convinced of the importance of peacemaking, we tend to think of this as the work of other people, people who maybe have special degrees in it, or people in the capitals of the world. For those of you who are maybe a little older in the room, you may remember, Henry Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy, or the Camp David Accords that Jimmy Carter brought together Menachem Begin from Israel and Anwar Sadat from Egypt. So we tend to think of peacemaking in that kind of faraway, noble, abstract way. We do not imagine, for the most part, that peacemaking is our work here in Iowa in 2025. I'm here to suggest exactly that possibility, that peacemaking might begin right now in this place with each of you. And the only reason I'm saying you rather than me is I'm heading back to New York tomorrow, so that's where I need to be working on peace. You are all here in Iowa. So I do want to note a couple of presuppositions in my challenge to you. The most important thing about all this is that peacemaking is a choice. It's not something we fall into. It doesn't just happen by accident. In fact, conflict is what happens by accident. Second, it's a choice for each of us where we are. It's not something that is going to happen in our world primarily in Washington, and I would say that in all times, not just right now. It's not something being done in the capitals of the world, at official peace-making tables. It's our work. I'm guessing that today, and I used this illustration in an earlier conversation today, I'm guessing that today everyone in this room can think of a situation you are in right now where you have people on the right and left of you who trust you more than they trust those other people on the other side of you. So just take a moment and think about it. Maybe it's at your dinner table, maybe it's in your church, maybe it's in your workplace. But I'm guessing that each of you has situations where there are people on the right and left of you who trust you more than they trust people on the other side. And I start with that because when that is the case, that's the beginning of your choice about whether you are going to be a peacemaker or whether you're just going to abdicate that responsibility and do something else. You either choose to be quiet, or you get a phone call that sends you out of the room, or you make some innocuous comment that isn't going to offend anybody. But you could choose to say, I'm going to be an imaginative, creative person of courage in this space. I'm going to be a peacemaker. Before I say more about it, I want to note that this is not an easy choice. Peacemaking is not for the faint of heart. And again, we're seeing in the world right now people that are trying to create peace in the Ukraine-Russian situation, in the Middle East. But right now I'm not talking about primarily those large situations. I'm talking about at our dinner tables, in our workplace, in our churches. What does it mean in this country right now to be working to move us beyond the polarization that is so evident and that's robbing our energy in so many different arenas? So peacemaking is hard work, it's creative work, and it's costly. So those are just some of the things I want to lay down right at the beginning. But in the face of these assumptions, I want to suggest today that people who have some kind of convictions about the world, people who are not just kind of wandering around, letting everything be, people who have worldviews, who have convictions about the world, people who are thoughtful about that, are actually in the best position to be peacemakers. That's my thesis. So I want to suggest a number of reasons I believe that. And again, I shared a few of these thoughts earlier on today in another context, and I didn't realize that some of those same people would be here tonight, so you'll recognize some of these themes. First of all, no one really expects religious people to be people of peace. And some of that goes into the stereotypes that Professor Collis already shared with us. Religious freedom even is sometimes touted by people as, well, that's just letting people be bigots and justify that bigotry or something like that. And so religious freedom itself is often used as a kind of a cause of conflict rather than part of the solution. So when you choose as a thoughtful person of faith to be a peacemaker, it's going to surprise people. So you have that advantage of surprise. Secondly, if you're here today, chances are that you do not have a narrow view of religious freedom. And what I mean by this is there is a view of religious freedom that's just about protecting your people. You know, religious freedom is something I need when my people are in trouble. And then when your people are not in trouble, you don't worry about it. That's a very narrow view of religious freedom, and it's certainly not the view that Professor Collis has called us to tonight. But it is a view that a lot of people have, and there are people who, when their group is doing fine, they don't worry about religious freedom. I'm guessing if you are here tonight and you care about our religious freedom today, you understand that religious freedom is something that is for everyone and something that we all need to be committed to all the time. And I do want to note a new book that's just come out that I just read a review on yesterday coming out on the plane, so I didn't really incorporate it into my talk. But I mention it tonight because it's by Jonathan Rauch. So he would be he comes from some ilk of the Jewish tradition, and I would let him describe that. My point is he's not coming from the Christian tradition, but he writes a book called Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. And he talks about the fact that there are branches of Christianity that are what he calls sharp Christianity, that's divisive and erosive of peacemaking. But then he says, what he calls thick Christianity is the kind of Christianity that he believes should be a part of at least the American story in the beginning, although, again, even that's complicated. But his point is, thick Christianity, or thick any religion, makes room within itself for those who are different. And actually, part of why I mention this tonight is because he holds up in this book the work of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a prime example of what he believes is an example of this thick Christianity that makes room for others. So if you're here tonight, I'm guessing that you're part of that large, thick vision of religious freedom. Third, if you are someone who cares about religious freedom, I'm guessing that you also have a framework that gives you a reason to care about other people besides the Constitution. Now, in saying this, I'm not minimizing the Constitution, but if you are a person of faith, you probably also have some sort of transcendent framework that gives you a reason to respect other people, to protect their dignity. If you're not familiar with Jonathan Sacks' work on the dignity of difference, or his last work, which was actually published posthumously, called Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. Jonathan Sacks was a rabbi, the chief rabbi in the United Kingdom, but his conviction is that every faith tradition has within it a framework that requires its adherents to respect others. So, again, if you are a person of faith, I believe that you have an extra reason, besides simply being an American citizen, to be about the task of peacemaking. Fourth, and this is a bit more abstract, so bear with me while I try to describe it. If you are a person of faith in our culture, I'm going to say that you have a greater potential than many people to be bilingual in the terms that are often dividing our country right now. in this polarized time. So if you are a person of faith, chances are you have the language of, again, more traditional religion. You may well have the language of more personal morality, which is usually associated with the right part of our society. But if you are a person of faith, you also understand the importance of social justice. You understand the language of the left. And if you are going to be a peacemaker, you need to have some version of being bilingual. You need to be a translator. You need to be someone who can interpret what people are saying and what they're not saying. I mean, when you think about, again, real debates that you have with your family members or whoever you debate with, how many of them actually become more intense because people are using language in different ways? They don't stop to define, well, help me understand how you're using that term. So I do believe that if you are a thoughtful person of faith, and I'm not going to develop this further given the time tonight, but that you have more chance than most people in our society to have the skills of being bilingual, that can understand the passions of the right and the passions of the left, and to be that host of creative middle space. To put this in a very touchy topic right now, and I'm not trying to be touchy, but I mean, given what's going on in our culture right now, this concern about language of DEI. Okay, so that's associated with the left, and right now it's something that, at least in public spaces, we're being told we should not be using that. Well, I think people of faith would want all people to be developing their potential to serve the common good, not because the development of potential is legally required, but because it's the right thing to do. And so that's an example, a very tangible example of what I mean by this work of translation. We should not be imprisoned by the categories, the fixed categories that are prompting so much of the divisiveness in our culture today. I'm guessing that if you are a person of faith, and serious person of faith, and a serious, thoughtful person of faith, that you have some idea of the cost of taking a stand on some of these issues. You know that you'll be criticized by both sides. You know that you, particularly in many contexts in our society that still are suspicious of religion, and the academy, I think, by and large, is one of those, although some quarters of the academy are getting better at that. But there would be, if you are a person of faith and you've lived your life that way, you know that there are costs of being people of integrity in this time. And so you're not taken off guard by that. So I think that's even an advantage in making the choice to be a person of courageous peacemaking. You also know, if you're a serious, thoughtful person of faith, that truly listening to others means the possibility of you being changed. If you're a thoughtful, serious person of faith, you've probably tasted what I call the bittersweet virtue of humility that allows you to find out that you actually can be mistaken, that you may not have a full understanding of a situation, and to realize that it's healthier to build your personal identity and to shape your personal loyalties around a larger, more complicated vision of the truth, even if it means admitting that you didn't have the total picture of a situation. I mean, think of how much conflict in our society today hinges on the fact that people care more about being right than they care about the truth. Or they care more about being seen to be right than they care about the truth. And so, again, my hope is, although I don't want to be too naive and Pollyanna-ish, but my hope is that as thoughtful people of faith, that there's a greater chance that we would have the combination of confidence and humility that would enable us to engage in these conversations where we are being hosts to people who have different opinions, because we do have convictions, but we don't think we are always right, and we're willing to have the humility and the curiosity, as one person mentioned in our earlier discussion today, to push people to larger visions of the truth than they may have right now. This work of peacemaking that I'm talking about is actually best done by people who have strongly held beliefs themselves. It's not something where I'm talking about being a peacemaker means that you suddenly become bland and wimpy, or let's just do a lowest common denominator solution to everything. No, this work of creative peacemaking that has the potential to change the polarization in our culture is going to be done by people who have conviction and speak out of that, and people who encourage other people to state their convictions and then to listen to the dialogue as people bring their convictions and together create something that is more imaginative and more whole than any of us could have by ourselves. Being a peacemaker is not ensuring that everyone wins, or that there's somebody wins and somebody loses, or that everybody wins and loses in the same amount. I mean, that's kind of what we call compromise, in the negative sense of compromise. When we talk about peacemaking, we're talking about trying to do something that creates something entirely new, something that could not be imagined by either of the sides in the discussion by itself. Being the kind of peacemaker that I'm suggesting tonight is not something that can be taught in 10 easy steps. Although I hadn't thought about your book. So actually, I may have to change this, because I did order the book, but I haven't read it. So maybe my talk will have to change when
There's not 10 easy steps.
Oh, but there's 10 steps, right?
Well, there's 10 habits. But there are a million sub-habits. You're fine.
Okay, good. Okay, because a habit is a lot more complicated than an easy step. Okay, all right, I'm safe. So there are ways of pursuing this, but there's no 10 easy techniques. And so, thank you, I'm safe. But yes, I'm looking forward to reading your book. It involves sustained imagination. You have to give everyone a reason to come to the table. Why should anyone risk giving up their convictions to be part of a dialogue that might involve them being changed? You have to figure out how to make everyone feel safe enough to come to the table, to ensure that if they're going to listen to someone else, someone's going to listen to them. You have to ask questions that allow everyone to share their own perspective and ideas and their own stories. You have to consider some rules of engagement that will ensure that everyone will listen to everyone else. And that's a really important part of doing this work, because whenever you get in a group of many opinionated people, there's always some people that just like to talk more than others. So you have to have some rules of engagement. And then if you're going to host these kind of conversations, you have to have some idea of what possible good might come out of that conversation to allow at least the hopeful possibility that people will engage in this. My hint tonight, and I do talk a lot more about this in my book, but I do want to make a plug tonight for such groups as Braver Angels. There are lots of groups in our society today that are really trying to model strategies for helping us to be better peacemakers. So if you want to do this hard work, go see someone else who's working at it. And Braver Angels would be a great example, but there are also lots of people, and what you're doing today is one of these things. Watch someone who's doing the peacemaking work while learn from them. It's like an apprenticeship more than anything else. Finally, if you are a person who cares about religious freedom, and you have invested yourself in any degree in this, I'm assuming that you're the kind of person who also has some glimpse of what might come of peacemaking. And again, I just thought very practically of some of the examples in my own life over the last several years, meeting interesting people. I mean, the most interesting people in the world are trying to figure out how to make peace. They're not just like, oh, well, let's study the causes of war. No, how do we do this creative, amazing thing that is not natural for us? I've often talked to people also who, in the process of interfaith dialogue or peacemaking work, it doesn't result in them becoming more bland about their own faith, but actually having a clearer idea of their own faith. When you are only talking to people that think exactly like you do, you don't even really know what you think, because you're just taking for granted what you think. It's only when people are asking you questions, help me understand, how did you come to that place, that you actually begin to understand your own position. We've also seen in our country an example, one very evident example in December 22, the Respect for Marriage Act, which really was an act that took about 8 years in the making. It was a bipartisan legislation, although I have to say the Democrats took the total credit for it, but there was actually a lot of bipartisan work that involved the combination of protecting gay marriage that had been in the law, in the statutory law, not just in the courts, but it also reaffirmed at the same time the historic religious freedom restoration acts, and so it was an amazing bipartisan activity. But I tell you this tonight because that work was 8 years in the making. It involved lots of faith-based colleges, non-faith-based colleges, attorneys. Again, since I know many of you are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the church was a very helpful agent in that work. There were also Jewish people, Roman Catholics, lots and lots and lots of groups. But the point is, it was 8 years in the making. And then something really amazing happened. And at the celebration event of that, which was held in Utah, sponsored by the church, there were a number of religious freedom attorneys who said that legislation was such a great example for bipartisan work. But again, it's hard, and there's not a lot of people that are willing to invest 8 years in that work. And then one more just example as I close. In my part of the country, in Buffalo, New York, we were one of the 14 cities for many years that welcomed refugees who came into the country, and they needed health care. And people of all ethnicities, all religions, rich, poor, all kinds of nonprofits got together and created a community health center, which none of them could have done by themselves. So this work of peacemaking is not just abstract, it's not just even in Washington, it's about practical issues in your own area. And actually, often you can get people who think differently to work together when there's some practical project that they all believe in. So that work of Jericho Road serves about 15,000 people in Buffalo every year. We are now in a particularly turbulent time in our country. You didn't need me to tell you that tonight. It would be tempting, if you're here tonight, to sit back and say, well, I'm going to wait until the air clears. I'm going to wait until it's easier to be this person hosting middle space. I'm here to suggest that the time to choose peacemaking is now, in the midst of the very circumstances in which we find ourselves. This work is not flashy, nor will it make the headlines, and that point has already been made very clearly by our previous speaker. I think of this work as the slow work that Jesus talked about, the work of salt, the work of yeast. I mean, you don't see salt or yeast at work. But if you don't have salt and yeast in situations, you know it's not there. And so this slow, powerful, hidden work is the kind of thing we're talking about with peacemaking. I believe that the trajectory of our country does not have to be the inexorable foreverness of polarization. Perhaps someday, someone will write a book about peacemaking in Iowa, as someone did about the village of Le Chambon in France in the Second World War. In the midst of Nazi-occupied France, when the darkness seemed to have the upper hand, one village chose to imagine an alternative, largely as the result of the courage and persistence of one Huguenot pacifist pastor. Philip Haley, who was an ethicist, discovered the story when he was doing research on the ethics of the inhumanity that human beings can have for one another. And in the introduction to the book, he writes about this. He said, when he came upon the story of Le Chambon, he said, I just started crying because in the midst of all this darkness, goodness happened there. And the story he writes, and if you haven't read the book, it's well worth reading. It's called Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed, the story of the village of Le Chambon and why goodness happened here. And in contrast to my earlier points about how it's hard to make peacemaking sound interesting, this is a very interesting book. One of the most compelling insights of the book was the pastor's conviction that if you know, and if you're a pacifist, you do know, that in the end, you will not resort to violence. And Pastor Trokmay's conviction was, if you know in the end that you will not resort to violence, you must begin way, way, way back in thinking about the possibilities for creative actions that will not allow injustice to triumph if you're not going to resort to violence. So his point is that the work of peacemaking is not the work of the moment. It's not the work of the moral hero who suddenly, like Mighty Mouse, flies in and saves the day. I guess Mighty Mouse would not be someone that the younger ones here know about. The older ones know. Mighty Mouse, that was long before the current movies. The best work of peacemaking comes from the long, steady, imaginative commitment to this. It's costly. It's work that, in our case, we might not talk about it as peacemaking versus war and violence, but it's coalition building, peacemaking that does not destine us to, again, a never-endingness of polarization. My conviction tonight is that if enough people in the country choose peacemaking in their own settings, that we are creating the possibility of a more hopeful future. I would like to think that somebody in the future will be able to write a book that describes how in certain parts of this country, just like in Le Chambon in Nazi-occupied France, this is the story of how goodness happened here. This is the story of how peacemaking happened here, not by accident, but by intentional choice of many, many, many individuals. So it's my hope tonight that this work of Iowa Religious Freedom Day, April 10th, 2025, will be part of that story. May it be so.
You talk about developing the peace framework between right and left, say. What if some refuse to communicate? So you can't even bring up opposing points and listen to them.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, as I said, this is not easy work. Every situation is different. I do believe, and again, I'm not suggesting this is easy. It's very, very, very difficult. Not everyone wants peace. But I do believe that this work of hosting middle space that I'm talking about involves knowing your audience. There may be people who just won't come to the table, but many people will come to the table if they are sure that they will have the opportunity to be treated fairly. And so I think part of our work is that preparation work of lots of questions. It's not pounding the table or trying to argue someone into this. It's helping people imagine a situation where they would have something to gain by risking coming to the table. And if someone won't come, I mean, there's not a lot you can do about that, but then you work with the people who will come to the table. So again, no simple answer to that, but I just want to underscore there is nothing simple about this work. It's creative, it's question asking, it's investing your time, putting your own reputation on the line sometimes. But that's what it's going to take, and that's why I come back. If people trust you on either side of you more than they trust the others, then you have something to give. And part of our job, I would say as American citizens, but also as people of faith, is to steward that trust well. So I'll leave it there. And again, if you want to talk more about this, you can come to the workshop. But thank you so much. And I do hope there's a few creative, courageous people who would choose peace in this group.